Welcome to my YouTube channel, Scary Tales. Now you will dive into horror stories that will shock you. And you please subscribe to the channel, put a like and write in the comments from which page and city and at what time you watch my video. Enjoy watching.
Ever since my city was devastated and turned into a disaster zone, my family and I ended up living in a shelter. This, which used to be an old motel, had now been transformed into a place for people in difficulty, and each room used to house several people, whether from the same family unit or not. Luckily, we at least had our own room, so that's a relief. However, we had had different neighbors, and as you can imagine, not all of them are nice. There is a bit of everything: addicts, people with mental problems, problematic people, and so on. And boy, did we have confrontations. One of the guys I met at the beginning, whom I'll call Michael, seemed like a good friend. He was bald, around 30 or 40. He wore glasses and had a fairly thick red beard. He was very friendly, so it didn't take him long to make friends with my parents once they started chatting to him on their smoke breaks. My mother is very sociable and always gets on well with everyone, while my dad is a bit more reserved. But he also ended up talking to Michael, so that made me trust him right away. Big mistake. My mother insisted that I go and meet him, thinking it might be a good connection, as he seemed like an educated and rather respectful guy. And I must say that at first he was great. I found him a bit sarcastic and he always wanted to talk about deep topics, but he was very nice and I became friends with him very quickly. Our conversations ranged from weird conspiracy theories to memories of TV shows from our childhoods, but it all got more and more heated and soon the dynamic changed. Michael started to bring up subjects that were very uncomfortable for my taste. He talked to me about his ex-wife and his past adventures. At first, I didn't mind him talking to me as if he were older after all. He had just turned 18. However, he then became more daring, and at one point, he started flirting with me, suggesting a possible relationship between us, something I had not considered at all. Although I was used to uncomfortable comments from older men, it still felt strange that someone who was surely at least 10 years older than me would make such a move. But the truth is that I felt lonely. I had lost touch with my friends, so any kind of interaction outside my family was welcome, even if it was in the wrong way. So I tried to politely reject it. On one of those occasions, while we were all outside, Michael came out and started chatting with us. But the conversation eventually turned to the subject of the shelter staff. To explain a little, there are always employees and one or two security guards on site, doing routine tasks such as checking rooms, delivering meals, and helping with the laundry. Some of them are great, but others are rude and abuse their authority, making life difficult for everyone. Then Miguel said that the security guard had been looking through the bathroom windows to make sure that nobody was smoking or using drugs. When my parents heard this, they were incensed. They couldn't believe it. Clearly, if it were true, this was an outrage, one of the many that were committed in that place according to some refugees. And of course, that outraged my parents. However, while my parents were enraged by the whole thing and asked how it was possible for them to behave in that way, I was skeptical about the whole story. I didn't quite trust these baseless accusations, as it could be a simple exaggeration from someone who wasn't in their best state. In the end, I decided it was best to stay away from Michael and take things down a notch, because things were starting to get weird, and I didn't know who I could really trust. So as the uncertainty grew, and the atmosphere in the refuge turned gloomy, one question kept going round and round in my head. Did I really know what was going on around me? With every passing moment, I realized that I had to put distance between Michael and me, especially if I wanted to protect myself from what seemed to be dark intentions on his part. A few nights after what happened with Michael, I was using the bathroom quietly when I heard crunchy footsteps right outside. The place was surrounded by orchards, so sometimes you hear people or animals walking among the trees, but this time my instinct told me that something was not right. So I looked towards the window, and I did it just in time to see a pale figure quickly walking away. Clearly, he had wanted to peek in, but he had realized that I had seen him. Quickly finishing what I was doing, I pulled up my pants and ran to where my parents were and told them what had happened to me, which obviously made them furious, and they immediately thought it was the security guard, so they went to find out. However, when they opened the door, they realized that the only security guard on duty that night was at the main entrance. But also, the pale guy I saw had nothing to do with the guard on duty that night, who was a tall, dark man. I let my parents know this, and they were very confused because they had no idea who it could have been. I, on the other hand, had my suspicions. The next morning, my parents kept asking people if they had seen or heard anyone at the bathroom windows the night before, but everyone said no. However, what really surprised me was not that no one had noticed the voyeur, but that no one mentioned the rumor about the guard. It was weird, especially considering how paranoid people were here. According to what Michael said, the guard peeping was a rumor that everyone talked about, but the fact that nobody even made a small mention of the subject only confirmed my suspicions that it was a lie. My parents, on the other hand, thought that Michael was just joking or that someone had tricked him. I wanted to believe it too, but part of me was sure that he knew very well what he was saying and had an ulterior motive in making us believe that. From then on, every time I used the bathroom, I made sure to close the window tightly. Spring arrived and the weather began to warm up, which meant that our clothes were now lighter so as not to cook us in the spring sun. I guess that was too much for Michael, because he became even more daring, both in his looks and in his comments and innuendos. The man became so brazen that my parents noticed, and it even bothered them. That's why they decided to ask for him to be moved to another room, and fortunately they did. After that, I tried to stay inside as much as I could. I just wanted to avoid Michael as much as possible. I really couldn't stand being around him anymore. But apparently he wasn't going to let it go that easily. Every time he saw me, he would start yelling at me from the other side of the shelter, and he would look at me in a disturbing way when I was walking my dog. The worst part was that I started to notice that familiar silhouette of Michael lurking outside our window, especially at night, spying on me behind the thin curtains while my family slept. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but then I realized it was definitely real. I would like to say that I told my parents, but I didn't. I was afraid they would make a big fuss and we would end up being expelled with nowhere to go, especially in the middle of the pandemic, so I decided to keep quiet. Michael continued with his game and it became more and more annoying, until one time things got out of control. On that occasion, I was in the bathroom, fresh out of the shower and with a towel wrapped around my body while I listened to music and brushed my teeth. In the middle of all that, I forgot to close the window that I had left open for the steam to escape. But just at that moment, I was struck by that overwhelming feeling of being watched. It was then that I remembered that I hadn't closed the window and how vulnerable I was, as this window was right behind me. I tried to act normally, trying to think it was just my paranoia, so I finished brushing my teeth and opened the medicine cabinet to put my toothbrush away. It was then that I made sure I saw the reflection in the mirror, and there he was, Michael, with his face pressed against the window screen, staring at me in a disgusting way. I was paralyzed with fear, but the most disturbing thing was that he didn't leave like he did last time. Instead, he stared at me and made a disgusting gesture with his tongue while smiling. I was so scared that I was shocked, just standing there unable to move a muscle. Suddenly, I heard the sound of footsteps and instantly someone pulled Michael back, and what followed was a roar of blows and screams. At that moment, I came out of my state of paralysis and ran out of the bathroom, only to find my father engaged in a fist fight with Michael. My heart began to beat fast and I started to scream like crazy, which caused a lot of people to gather around. A few seconds later, 2 security guards arrived and broke it up, while Michael shouted that my dad had attacked him first and that he hadn't done anything. I couldn't believe his nerve, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it, so at that moment, I told the guards what had happened, and later I reported the harassment I had been suffering for months at the hands of this guy. After that, the authorities searched Michael's cell phone, and what they found there left me frozen. Michael had a lot of photographs of me, several of them while I was in the shower, which filled me with shame. but perhaps the most disturbing were those in which I could be seen sleeping in my bed and the angle at which they were taken. It was as if he were right in front of me, very close. I had no idea when he had taken those photographs. Michael was eventually expelled from the shelter, and despite the suggestion made to me by the center's authorities, I did not want to file a complaint with the police. The fact that I would not have to see him at the shelter again was enough for me. My parents were very angry with me for not having told them from the beginning, and they had every right to be. Luckily, my father didn't have to face any charges for the attack on Michael, but from that time on, he was very vigilant with me. He was always watching out for me and practically followed me everywhere. It was suffocating at times, but I guess I brought it on myself by hiding things from them. I didn't trust myself much anymore. It still makes my skin crawl thinking about Michael, especially because I know he has 2 daughters, and I can't help but worry about them. I hope they are never taken into his custody, because even if he didn't physically hurt them, I can't imagine what it would be like to grow up with a father who acts like that. No one should have to deal with someone like him. It's terrifying. Before I turned 18, I decided I was ready to leave my parents' house. Most kids my age were still at home, but I was eager to live on my own, so as soon as I got a job, I moved into a small shared apartment in a not-so-good part of town. At first, it wasn't easy. Let's just say that freedom came at a price. However, I valued my privacy highly, so I kept looking for a better place where I could be alone, just as I had always wanted. At the age of 24, I finally found a good job that allowed me to move to a decent neighborhood. A refreshing change after having been through some of the darkest areas of the city, full of gangs and problems. It was a quiet place, or so I thought, until a few months after moving into my new apartment, a new neighbor moved into the apartment next door. The apartment had been empty for a while, but the real estate agent never told me who would be moving in. When I took a look at what would be my home, I remember that I liked it a lot. Although there were some tall trees next to the window of the main bedroom that cast strange shadows at night, but nothing that I couldn't solve with some dark curtains. Everything was fine for a couple of weeks, until one weekend, when I was planning to relax watching movies and eating popcorn. I heard someone knocking on my door. I looked through the keyhole and saw a guy smiling broadly, dressed in casual clothes and sandals. It seemed strange to me, as I wasn't expecting anyone, and I hardly knew my neighbors, not to mention that his smile and his gaze fixed on the keyhole really made me angry. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm your new neighbor," he introduced himself, as if that was going to change my discomfort. I looked at him silently through the spy hole for a moment, trying to keep up appearances. Then I opened the door for him to come in, and wow, I was in for a surprise. The guy was more attractive than I expected. He had a well-groomed beard, blue eyes that seemed to scan me, and a well-built body. I was speechless for a moment, just staring at him, and when he spoke to me, his scent intoxicated me. God, that man smelled delicious. At that moment, my anger completely subsided. "Hi, I'm new here. I'm looking to make friends," he said as he moved towards my kitchen, leaving me trapped in his wake. "I moved in on Wednesday, but you never seem to be at home." I reacted nervously, saying, "Yes, it's just that I'm busy. I work in a law firm and I'm there all the time. I'm only less busy at the weekends, and well, here I am." He laughed at my distress and introduced himself again. "Well, my name's Bruce." "Oh, it's a pleasure, Bruce." "I'm Tira," I said. For a moment I felt trapped in a strange conversation, and his familiarity made me a little alert. He treated me as if he had known me forever. He even opened my fridge and poured himself a glass of water. It was weird. We had just met and we didn't have that kind of trust. However, I decided that he was just a somewhat confident guy looking for company, so I continued with the chat. "Do you live alone?" he asked me, to which I replied, "Yes, I'm single, and maybe looking for something," I said almost without thinking, and I blushed a little after saying it. He laughed, probably because of how obvious my nerves were. But at that moment I realized that I was wearing a ring on my ring finger. "Are you married or something?" I asked, with a little mistrust. That depends on who you ask, he joked. But my gaze was focused on that ring. In an attempt to break the ice, he changed the subject and started talking and joking about random things, but with every smile, he became so close that it made me feel nervous. However, the conversation flowed. So you're saying you're looking for someone, huh? But how serious are you hoping for? He asked me. Yes, I'm in no hurry for something serious, but if it happens, it will be welcome, I said, trying to play it down. Bruce smiled, apparently enjoying our conversation. That's smart, we're on the same page, he emphasized, covering his ring with his hand. Oh, so he really wasn't married. The lie hung in the air, and I wondered how far he would go with his tricks. As we talked, the atmosphere became increasingly tense. His friendly attitude and the way he smiled started to give me a bit of a bad feeling. The situation itself was already weird, and something in the air didn't feel right. While I tried to shake off my uneasiness, he continued to ask me increasingly personal questions. Inside, I felt that something was wrong, as if this new neighbor had a hidden agenda that I couldn't figure out. Could I really trust this guy? What was he really after? I ended the conversation with a slight knot in my stomach, remembering that I lived next to a person who, although he seemed friendly and was very attractive, was a complete stranger to me, and perhaps, just perhaps, he might not be as harmless as he seemed. We continued talking about love and marriage, but it wasn't long before I was overcome with tiredness, and I suggested that we meet on the Sunday after church. Bruce agreed and left my house, opening the door by himself without waiting for me to do so. At that moment, a light bulb went on in my head. You could tell that he was very comfortable in my space, as if it wasn't the first time he had been there. Although this made me suspicious, I tried not to think about it too much and decided it was time to get some sleep. So I moved to my room and lay down on the bed, but a thud on the ceiling woke me up. I tried to go back to sleep, but without success. So, with nothing better to do, I thought I'd go out for a walk around the neighborhood and ended up in a nearby square. There I looked for a place to relax, and I stayed to enjoy the fresh air and the few people who were there. But after a while, the calm vanished. Just as I was thinking of leaving, I saw Bruce arrive in the square with a tanned woman dressed in white with curly brown hair. They were holding hands, and it was clear that he had something going on with her. My thoughts turned at that moment. The guy had clearly lied about being single, and I couldn't help but smile ironically at the whole situation. With that in mind, I decided to leave the place quickly before he saw me. That night, I was already ready to sleep when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and as I imagined, when I answered, I knew it was Bruce. "Hello, neighbor," he said cheerfully. Although I found him attractive, I didn't like getting a call from him so late, even more so after I had discovered his lie. "What do you want, Bruce?" I replied, feeling defensive. "Oh, you're already asleep," he replied, laughing. That irritated me even more. "What about you? Why are you calling at this hour?" I said to him, a little annoyed. He laughed again, but then he ended the call abruptly. I'd had enough. I needed to disconnect from all that, so I turned off my phone and got into bed. The night passed quickly, but at around 7 o'clock in the morning, I was woken by a knock on the door, and sure enough, it was Bruce. "Am I not too early or too late?" he asked cheerfully as he entered, but I noticed that he had a strange mark near his left eye. Bruce didn't wait for my answer and instead flopped down on the sofa in my living room as if he were at home. "Sorry if I disturbed you last night," he said casually, but I couldn't help but notice that mark on his face. It was nothing," I replied, trying to be polite. However, I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Then, just at that moment, the TV started showing a news item that caught my attention. The body of a girl has been found in the wooded area near Daenerys's East Coast Square. The young woman has been identified as Leslie Parker. At that moment, I looked back at the screen, and it was her. It was the girl I had seen entering the square with Bruce that night. At that moment, my heart raced and cold sweat began to run down my forehead. Instinctively, I turned my gaze back to him, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. He had a knife in his hands, and his pants were unbuttoned. Without thinking twice, I got up from the sofa and tried to run away, but he caught me in the act, and his arms pulled me towards his body while I tried to unbutton my dress. He started shouting at me to stay still and threatened to stab me, while I struggled desperately to get free. But in the midst of my panic, I managed to kick him in the groin, which made him let go of me, and I took the opportunity to run towards the door. However, just as I thought I was going to make it, Bruce caught me and I fell to the floor. "No one will save you," he whispered. "I've locked the doors from the outside." "Where's my key?" I shouted as I tried to open the door, but I was sure he had locked it from the outside. "I have a camera in every room," he said with a laugh. The situation was terrifying, but I knew I had to find a way to escape from him, or my name would be the next one to appear in the news. So I decided to act. He was on top of me at that moment, with the edge of the knife grazing my neck, so any movement could cause him to cut my throat, but I had to try at any cost. I remained completely still, making him think that I had finally given up. Then he smiled wickedly and said to me, "Great, you finally understood. This can be good or very bad if you don't cooperate." I nodded and asked him to just let me live. "Maybe," he said, and my blood ran cold. At that moment, he leaned over and started kissing my neck, and I took the opportunity to raise my knee sharply, and with all my strength, I hit him right in the crotch and pushed him away immediately. As he writhed in pain, I grabbed a nearby glass vase and broke it over his head, knocking him unconscious. I breathed a sigh of relief at that moment, but I knew I couldn't just leave him there, so I found my phone and called the police. "Hello, I need urgent help. My neighbor attacked me with a knife, and he was the one who killed the girl in the square." As I waited, my mind kept going over all the signs I had ignored. I knew I had got into trouble through my own recklessness. I should never have opened my door to a stranger just because he was attractive. Time passed slowly until I heard the sirens in the distance. I looked at Bruce, still lying on the ground, and knew I had done the right thing. I wasn't going to be his new victim. Fortunately, Bruce was imprisoned and will have to spend many years in prison, but the trauma of what happened that night will undoubtedly haunt me forever. This happened a couple of years ago, and it still makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. My husband, our 3-year-old daughter, and I decided to move to Tennessee in search of a fresh start. After a long journey, we were exhausted and just wanted to unpack and settle into our new home. My parents, who lived nearby, were helping us unload, and all of a sudden, all the neighbors in the complex started coming out to greet us. That's when we met Vit, and from the first moment he gave me a bad vibe. I remember that my daughter, who has always been too sociable with strangers, hid behind my husband, clearly scared, which didn't help us like him any better. He introduced himself and we chatted for a while, but we were more concerned with organizing our things than making friends with our new neighbors. Later, my father told me that as he was returning to the van, he saw Vit staring eerily at our daughter, and when he called his attention to it, he denied it, which already left me with an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. So that night, my husband asked him to leave. We stayed to go through the boxes while my daughter spent the night with my parents. At around 10:30 p.m., we heard a knock on the door. We thought it was the pizza we had ordered, but when we opened the door, there was Vit again. "Do you need help with anything?" he asked with a strange smile. My husband and I just stared at him for a moment, surprised to see him at our door at that hour. I have no idea what made him show up so late, but it was weird. Before we could ask him to leave, Vit asked us for a cigarette. Seriously? Nobody smokes in this house, and my husband made it clear that he didn't have any cigarettes, but that seemed to infuriate him, and when he saw that he wouldn't get what he wanted, the man started shouting and hitting the wall. It was a terrifying sight. Fortunately, our landlord, who lived across the street, came out to set the record straight while Vit walked away, muttering under his breath. The landlord then explained that Vit was well known in the area and struggled with mental health issues. but that he was generally harmless as long as he took his medication. Great, right? That's exactly what you want to hear on your first night in a new place. Although the situation calmed down, our arrival in Tennessee was not peaceful. We had crazy schedules and sometimes worked night shifts, but almost every time I got home around midnight, I saw Vit standing outside our building, as if he were waiting for me to arrive. At first I just ignored him. I was too tired to worry, but there he was, still asking me for cigarettes, while I continued to make the same gesture of rejection, which I also did to my husband. Sometime later, we decided to change our work schedules just to avoid Vit. At first it worked, but eventually he started showing up during the day. One day, while we were taking our daughter to the park, he came up and said he could come with us and that he was great with kids. That set alarm bells ringing. Trust him with our daughter? No way, I thought. In that moment, I really should have let my husband punch him in the face. When we returned home that afternoon, Vit was already in our parking space, according to him, making sure that nobody parked in our space. Then he tried to hug our daughter, and she was so scared that she screamed and clung to me as if her life depended on it. This was too much. At that moment, fed up, my husband asked me to take the girl inside the house, and as he left, I heard my husband explode and give Vit a strong reprimand, demanding that he leave us alone. It was a tense and decisive moment, but I knew that this story was not over. After the whole scene that night, we decided to have a serious talk with the building owner about the whole situation. So we went to his place and told him everything that had been happening to Vit. But guess what? Our problems clashed with Vit's mental health problem. I understand that dealing with mental health problems is not easy, but he was harassing and terrorizing our daughter, so we had to protect her. That was our priority. After that, things only got worse. The situation reached a point where our daughter refused to go out because she was convinced that the bad man would be there, watching her with that disturbing look. This was too much. So we approached our landlord with the idea of breaking the rental contract if they didn't do something about it. Meanwhile, I started talking to other neighbors, and surprise, almost everyone had similar experiences with him. One of them told me that he and another neighbor had seen him stalking girls in the pool when they were wearing bikinis and shorts. So they approached and scared him away, taught him a lesson, and informed the landlord. But as usual, they did nothing about it. After a month, things calmed down a bit. Vit seemed to have disappeared, and we were starting to think that maybe he had moved somewhere else. It was a relief. At the time, we were considering moving in with my parents while we saved up and looked for a new home. One night, I arrived home early after working 11 hours. My husband was away on business, and our daughter had gone to visit family with my parents. So I decided to take a break and relax a bit by watching a movie. I had a long day and really needed to distract myself. So I was completely engrossed in the plot when, suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was around 10 p.m., and I knew that, at that time of night, people would normally send you a message or call before showing up. I got up to see who it was, but before I could get to the door, the knob started shaking violently, and that's when I heard Vit scream, "Let me in! Open this damn door!" Then he started banging his shoulder against the door like a madman, still yelling for it to be opened. Panic overcame me at that moment, so I grabbed my phone and the sharpest knife in the kitchen. The idea of hiding in the closet may sound cliché, but I preferred to put some distance between us in case he came in. While I was scared, I called 911, and they informed me that other neighbors had also called. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard sirens and the voices of police officers outside. Only then did I feel safe enough to open the door, and when I did, I saw a policeman holding Vit face down on the ground. The landlord was shouting and pushing the officers, demanding that they release Vit, and in the end they were both arrested. I gave my statement, and each of my neighbors corroborated what I had said, even adding their own experiences with Vit. A sweet neighbor from church contacted my husband and my parents to update them on what was happening, and she even offered me to stay with her and her family that night, but honestly, after what had happened, I couldn't sleep a wink. I was still terrified and could almost hear Vit's voice shouting and banging on the door from outside, and what I found out later made my hair stand on end. It turns out that Vit was a registered sex offender. Rumor had it that the owner of the place knew, but he ignored it on purpose because Vit's family gave him a little extra money in exchange for letting him stay. That made me sick. Although he was taking medication for his mental health problems, I found out that he hadn't taken anything in months. The scariest thing was that he tried to tell the police that our daughter was his and that we had kidnapped her. That terrified me even more. I didn't know if he was just lying to try to justify himself or if he really believed that in his deranged mind. The last I heard of him was that he was sent to some kind of institution. I don't know if it was a prison or a psychiatric hospital. As for the owner of the place, it was nothing less than a scandal. He ended up being fired and practically expelled from the city. In the end, they offered us 3 months free rent for our troubles, but that wasn't enough. We had reached breaking point with the situation, so we decided to sell most of our things and move in with my parents. Now, sometime after all this happened, I'm happy to say that we have a new house. Our daughter is no longer afraid to go out, and of course we do background checks on all our new neighbors. We don't want to take any more risks. In the end, what seemed like chaos ended up being our return to the security and tranquility that every parent wants for their family. My wife Stephanie and I decided to make a drastic change and move to a place with a warmer climate. After searching for a while, we found a small apartment in an old complex that, although not large, was cozy and just what we were looking for. Everything seemed perfect, until the weirdness began. One night, I went out to take out the trash, and as I did, I saw someone sitting on the stairs, tapping something in their hands. He had his back to me, so I couldn't see what was going on. But just as I was about to pass him, something stopped me in my tracks. Looking down, I saw that the guy had his hand wrapped around my ankle. "Let go of me, you lunatic!" I shouted at him as I moved my leg frantically, trying to get away. But then the guy started laughing, which left me completely confused. After struggling a bit, I managed to free myself and get up, full of rage and wanting to punch him in the face. Suddenly, I heard a voice shout. I looked up and saw a small, frail woman, clearly older, approaching. "What are you doing?" she asked in a trembling voice. "I'm calling the police, ma'am." "Let him go now," she ordered. I had no idea what was going on until the woman continued talking, saying that the guy was her son and that he wasn't well. At that moment, I turned to look at the man, and I could see that indeed something was wrong with him. So I hung up the phone, and after tidying myself up a bit and throwing away the trash, I went back inside, feeling weird about the situation. What was strange was that during all the shouting, several people had passed by the entrance and looked at me as if I were the crazy one. One of them even said, "God, I hope I don't start talking to myself." I didn't understand why he said that, but I didn't think anything of it. When I told my wife, she laughed, thinking the situation was very funny. "I wish I'd seen it," she said with that smile that always melts my heart. I tried to let it go, but that night I couldn't sleep. I heard a noise coming from outside, and I tossed and turned in bed while my wife slept like a log. Finally, I decided to go out and see what was happening, and in the hallway, I heard shouting and banging, as if someone were fighting. As I leaned out onto the stairs, I saw the same guy who had grabbed my leg, this time banging his head against the wall, while his mother was telling him to stop. When he noticed me looking at him, he stopped for a second, but then suddenly he sprinted towards me. "What the hell?" I exclaimed. But before I could react, the madman rammed into me and I fell to the ground. "What the hell are you doing?" I thought as I tried to get him off me. He was a big guy and it was harder than I thought, until I finally managed to punch him in the face hard enough to make him back off for a moment. But then the mother started screaming, accusing me of killing her son. I had to say a couple of words to him before the guy put his hands to his face and ran to his apartment, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Another neighbor was coming up the stairs at that moment and stopped when he saw me. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. "That madman is a real danger to everyone," I replied. But he looked at me as if I were speaking another language. He simply nodded and went on his way. The next morning, when I opened the door to go out to work, I was frozen. There was a pool of blood right next to my door. I already knew who it was, so I went straight to the mother's apartment. I was fed up with that madman and I needed to do something. "Madam, I need to talk to you. What happened yesterday?" "I have blood on my door. I think it's better if I called the police. Your son is a threat and he's out of control," I said. The woman looked at me and her face hardened. Then she spat. "My son is sleeping. Don't blame him for what happened. I'm sure you did it because you have something against different people." And she slammed the door in my face. That night when I got home, Stephanie told me that something strange had happened. While she was reading a book, someone had knocked on the door, and when she opened it, she found something hanging on a string right in front of her face. A small skull that looked like it belonged to a bird. This scared her so much that she called the police, but they didn't take it very seriously. They just told her to be on the lookout and to call again if anything strange happened. Hearing that, I knew the crazy neighbor was behind it all and I had to do something. After what happened, I decided it was time to confront my neighbors, so I knocked on their door again, but nothing. Just when I thought it was all in vain, a woman came out of an apartment across from mine, looked at me like I was crazy and said, "You're wasting your time. There's no one there." I couldn't believe it. They were gone. Frustrated, I went back to my apartment and got back into bed with Steph. That night, she seemed calm, while I was going a mile a minute because of everything that had happened. I finally managed to sleep, but it was already around 3 a.m. when a strange noise woke me up again. It was a sound coming from the kitchen, so, a little scared, I went out to see what was happening. When I turned on the light, boom, something hit me in the face. It was a pigeon, flying all over the kitchen like crazy. "What are you doing here, little one?" I whispered, trying to get it out of there. But just then, I remembered the small bird skull I saw earlier, and the image of my crazy neighbor popped into my mind, and then I knew. "He's in the house!" I shouted, as I rushed to the bedroom looking for Steph. Fortunately, I found her fast asleep in bed, and an enormous feeling of relief washed over me. But when I heard a noise behind me, I turned and there was my neighbor, smiling and holding something in his hand. "What have you got there, mate?" I asked, trying not to sound confrontational. Then he calmly raised his hand and I saw that he was holding a dead pigeon by the neck. It was chilling, but I had to keep calm for everyone's sake, especially Stephanie's. "This is not good, mate. It's time to go," I said, trying to keep my cool, but he just stood there staring at me. I approached him, trying to move him to the exit, and it seemed like I was succeeding. But then he saw a cookie in the kitchen and stared at it in awe. "Oh, so you want the cookie? Take it if you want," I said calmly, giving him the opportunity to leave peacefully. He looked at me with a distrustful face, but in the end he took the cookie and left without further ado. Thank goodness it didn't get any worse. I didn't tell Steph at the time. She was very relaxed in bed and I thought it would be better to wait until tomorrow. The next morning on my way to work, I passed by the neighbor's apartment and noticed that the door was open. Curious, I looked inside, but was surprised to see that the place was completely empty and a couple of workers were doing some repairs. "Excuse me, did they move out?" I asked them, thinking that this might be the end of this madness. They looked at each other as if I had said something stupid. "Who moved out?" one asked. "You know, the guy and his mom," I replied. "Sir, this apartment has been empty since 2005. Someone bought it recently," the worker told me, and I was left speechless. "Did you see them?" A voice behind me interrupted me. It was the lady from the apartment across the way. "I see them too sometimes," she said. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, still confused. "Maggie and Nikki died years ago. He had mental problems, and in the middle of a psychotic crisis, he killed her and then committed suicide," she said, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and fear. "I guess you see them too, but don't worry, he's a good guy." "Well, most of the time. he added as he slowly closed the door, leaving me standing there, speechless and not knowing what to think. So all this time, have I been seeing their ghosts? At that moment, I felt a sharp pain in my head. It was so horrible that I collapsed on the floor, holding my head with my hands, trying to mitigate the pain. But at one point, I fainted, and when I came to, I opened my eyes again. I was in the hospital and my mother was by my side. "How do you feel, darling?" she said to me softly. "Where is Stephanie?" I asked her. But she pressed her lips together and said, "Darling, she's gone. She died, Ben, 5 years ago, and you need to let her go once and for all. Son, you haven't taken your medication for months, and you know perfectly well what that can lead to. Remember the case of our neighbors, Maggie and Nikki. Look what Nikki did for not taking his medication. Do you really want to end up the same way?" At that moment, all the memories collided in my mind, hitting me like a speeding train. Now I remembered. Steph's death, the tragedy of the neighbors, my diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Climate change is the only thing. That day I was discharged from the hospital and my mother convinced me to go back home with her again. Since then, not a single day has gone by that she hasn't reminded me to take my pills. To be honest, I miss Steph, but at least I never saw Maggie and Nikki again, nor the weird neighbor across the street. It all started at the beginning of the 90s when I was about 10 or 11 years old. My family and I lived in a small rural corner near Kansas City. Believe me, that area has changed a lot since then. Now it is full of developments and cars, but back then it was pure tranquility. The road we lived on was a gravel road and cars rarely came by. In fact, the only ones who used to drive down it were the neighbors, as there were only a handful of houses on our street. In front of our house was a large cornfield and a couple of trees. There were other kids my age who lived nearby, and we all thought it would be cool to build a fort in a tree or something. So every day, my friends and I would cross the street and play there. Imagine that scene from the TV series It, where the Losers Club is building things in the river. Well, that's what our life was like. One day, while I was outside with one of my friends, we noticed that a small blue car was starting to drive down the street in a strange way. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor passing by, as the road was narrow and it wasn't unusual for someone to drive slowly. But this car was going so slowly that it almost seemed like the driver was looking for something. And besides, we had never seen it around before. Every time it passed, I could see that the driver's gaze rested directly on me for a few seconds. I saw that car at least a couple of times that afternoon, but I didn't think much about it. Maybe he was just curious about our game or had gotten lost, I supposed. However, when my friend went home, the blue car reappeared, and this time it stopped right in front of me. Now the driver was looking at me with a disturbing intensity, and suddenly a chill ran through my body. I remember my dad's warnings about strangers. Never talk to strangers, and if anyone tries to grab you, run and scream. That instruction echoed in my head as I thought about what to do. If I ran in the opposite direction, I would end up in the vast cornfield. But if I decided to go home, I would have to cross the street and pass right by that weird guy. My heart was beating so fast that I felt like I could hear it over the sound of nature and the car's engine. But as I tried to decide which direction to take, I saw the man crouch down towards his seat. I didn't know what he was looking for, but something inside me told me that if I didn't move fast, I could be in trouble. And just when I thought it was time to escape, he opened the car door and I saw his cowboy boots touch the ground. My dad was home, so I decided I had to try and get to him no matter what. Then, without thinking, I started running as fast as I could, keeping my eyes fixed on the gravel driveway. Just then, the guy closed the door and put the car in reverse. If I had been a second slower, I don't know what could have happened. As I ran, I could feel a wind behind me. The trunk of the car almost caught up with me as I darted towards the entrance of the house. I screamed at the top of my lungs as I ran toward the small gate of the wooden fence, and at the sound of the commotion, My dad came running out of the house, and when I turned to point at the stranger, he was gone. All I could see was a cloud of dust rising into the air as the blue car disappeared at full speed. That night, I had a horrible nightmare. I dreamt that I was running along an endless gravel road, gasping for breath, sweating and terrified. And every time I looked back, the car got closer and closer, while the man at the wheel smiled in a disturbing way. I woke up from the nightmare crying and screaming, and my parents came to see what was wrong. I had to sleep for a while in their room while the night terrors stalked me, but eventually they stopped. Today, almost 3 decades later, I still remember that day like it was yesterday. I have no doubt that the man in the blue car was the kind of monster your parents warn you about, and if I hadn't had the instinct to run away, who knows where I would be now. I often hear stories about children who disappeared in my area in the 90s, and I can't help but wonder if that man was involved. It's a mystery I'll probably never solve. My father's warning stayed with me. Someday, when I have children, I will also tell them to run and scream if a stranger approaches them. Because in life, sometimes reality can be more terrifying than any horror story. As soon as I opened my eyes, a feeling of vulnerability took hold of me. I was completely alone, and fear enveloped me like a heavy blanket. I looked around, and to my surprise, it was midnight. The silence of the night was profound, and I could clearly hear my own breathing echoing in the air, so I got out of bed and began to grope my way through the darkness, feeling my way to the window. When I got there, I pulled back the curtains carefully, afraid of making a noise. I glanced outside, but there was nothing. The streets were deserted and calm, but even so, I couldn't get it out of my head. The nightmare I had had was so vivid that it felt more real than a simple dream. I could almost swear that at one point in my dream, I saw a pair of terrifying, angry eyes looking at me. I closed my eyes and opened them again, but the image was gone. It was just a dream. I kept telling myself to calm down, but the fear continued to haunt me like a wild animal. I tried to push those dark thoughts away, and little by little, I felt calmer. I went back to bed and fell asleep again without any more problems. The next morning I woke up, and the disturbing experience of the night before seemed like a distant memory. The sun was shining, and everything seemed cheerful as every day. So I went to the shower without thinking any more about my nightmare. I had a routine to follow, so I enjoyed a hot bath and brushed my teeth. Then I ran to the closet to find the clothes I had chosen for work, but instead I found my outfit lying on the bed. That was weird. There was nothing on the bed a few moments ago. What the hell is this doing here? I wondered. Without giving it too much thought, I assumed I had taken it out without realizing it. I dressed quickly and ran to work, and when I arrived, there was a long and tedious meeting that went on longer than I expected, and when I finally left, I was eager to get home. As I entered the parking lot, something strange happened. I noticed someone running away from my car without even looking back. "Hey, who are you?" I shouted, but got no response. I assumed it was a security guard doing his rounds, so I shrugged and hurried to my car, thinking how strange that had been. As soon as I parked the car in the garage, I started to feel like someone was following me. I turned my head several times to see who it was, but I didn't see anyone. That made me even more nervous. I grabbed my cell phone and was tempted to call the police, but I stopped myself. I had no idea what I would say to them, so driven by panic, I ran back to my house and locked the doors immediately. I took off my clothes as soon as I got there and decided to have a shower. It had been a long day and I just wanted to relax. So I set the water to cold to calm my nerves, but when the water stopped running, something strange happened. I heard a metallic sound, a crash, as if several utensils had fallen to the kitchen floor. I immediately became alert and hurried out of the bathroom, trying to put my clothes back on, but to my horror, I couldn't find them. They had vanished, as if someone had taken them. My heart was pounding as I tried to compose myself. What was going on? The feeling that this house was cursed took hold of me, and the idea that someone was stalking me caused me to panic. My thoughts revolved around whether I was really in danger. On a sudden impulse, I grabbed a baseball bat from the cupboard, wrapped a towel around my waist, and slowly went downstairs to see what had happened. I went straight to the kitchen and my heart raced when I found the utensils on the floor. But that wasn't all. One of my knives had also disappeared without a trace. Now I was really scared. I knew that if there was anyone in the house, that person was armed with that knife. I checked all the doors, but they were still locked. I thought maybe it was my imagination playing tricks. I should see a therapist, I thought. I returned to my room where my clothes were still stretched out on the floor, exactly where I had left them before my shower. It was probably just the darkness, I told myself. I was almost not hungry, so I flopped down on the bed, reflecting on everything I had experienced in recent years. At only 25, I had achieved a lot, but I had also lost a lot. My thoughts drifted to Grace. She had been an important part of my life. We had attended the same university, but our relationship ended when she decided to move to Los Angeles to follow her dream of becoming famous. Honestly, I never thought she would really make it, and I was convinced that the long distance wouldn't work. Just as I closed my eyes in an attempt to push those memories away, I felt a strange presence outside the window. A shadow entered my room, and on closer inspection I saw that it was a human figure holding something resembling a knife. My heart pounded as I took out my cell phone and dialed 911. "Hello, there is an intruder in my house. He has a weapon," I muttered in a trembling voice, giving them my address. The shadow was getting closer and closer while my body trembled with fear. I had never been in such a situation before, and it seemed that everything I had been through had led me to this moment, and I didn't know how to react. Suddenly I heard a thud. The window broke, and the shadow jumped inside. God, it was Grace. I was shocked to see her, but instead of the sweet girl I had met, she now looked furious, and she was holding my knife in her hand. "Don't say my name, you bastard," she shouted at me, coming closer. "What do you think? That you can live the life of your dreams while I'm trapped here?" Her gaze had become wild, and something in her eyes reflected a madness that I did not recognize. But just as she was about to lunge at me with the knife, I heard the police sirens approaching, and in an instant, she jumped out of the window in a desperate attempt to escape. But it was too late. They caught her and put her in handcuffs. I looked at her in shock as they took her away in the patrol car. I didn't know what to feel at that moment. As the police car drove away, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. I wasn't even angry about everything that had happened. Maybe I didn't need a therapist, but something different. Maybe, just maybe, what I really needed was a new girl in my life, someone different, who had a mind of her own and who wouldn't leave me with that empty feeling. As the car's lights flashed in the distance, I smiled to myself, imagining a future where I could finally leave all that darkness behind.